Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Nigel Smith and I'll be your host today. I'm a member of the PMI UK Digital Events team and today's webinar is entitled Cultural Pitfalls in International Project Management, presented today by our guest speaker, Marina Ibrahim. Now, before I introduce Marina, I just want to cover off a few bits of session housekeeping. Now, we want our webinar today to really come alive for you. So if you haven't done so already, please get your phones out and your tablets or open a new browser and go to menti.com and enter the code 712085. That's menti.com and 712085. Menti helps us improve the energy around the subject and your participation in the session. And experience tells me that you're just as likely to learn just as much from each other today as you will from Marina. Now, there will also be time for questions and answers at the end of Marina's presentation. And this will be facilitated today by my colleague, Merv Wyeth. Further, there'll also be an extended opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the session, as Marina has offered to stay over for a further 20 minutes or so to take more questions. So if you do want to join us, you're more than welcome to do so. And all of the output from today's session will be available in the Digital Events Library on pmi.org.uk, usually within a couple of days, both as a slide share and as an on-demand webinar recording. As attendees, you'll automatically receive an email signposting you to the right place, most likely later today. And for PMI members, the PDU code will be given out at the end of the webinar, together with a list of our future exciting upcoming events. Now, before we do start, I would like to know where everyone is joining us from today. So if you're now in Menti, please type in where you are. And Marina, if you could forward the slides, please, that would be great.
Oops. Oh, that was me.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So getting a few bits and pieces coming in there. So I can see Italy on there, India we have, Ireland, Cambridge.
Even the US.
Yeah, so a bit of cultural diversity coming in through the
yes, we have Italy. Yes. Great.
Excellent. So at the moment, we've got almost 100 people on the call, which is really, really great. And we've got roughly half that responses into the Menti question right now. So thanks everyone that's contributing to interactivity. That's looking really, really great.
Wonderful.
We can leave that question open as well, Marina. And what I'd like to do now is move to the next question, which is if you could please add in the typical role that you do in a project, be it at a leadership level through a delivery specialist, maybe you're a business analyst or a benefits manager, or non-project related at all, or maybe you've got a PMO function, or you're in academia or a research assistant. And what we're seeing here, Marina, is fairly typical of the stats we get on most of our calls here. Most people tend to be those project delivery specialists. Excellent. I think what I'll do, Marina, as those results are coming in, again, we're getting roughly half of the participants with their interaction, which is really great. Thank you for that. I just want to take a couple of minutes to introduce Marina. And Marina is the cultural agility expert and global mindset coach. She helps executives, experts, and expats to hit the ground running and thrive on their international projects, even if they are unaware of potential cultural clashes. Coming from a cosmopolitan background and German Egyptian descent, Marina has in-depth knowledge and experiences of the challenges and rewards involved with living and working internationally for over 30 years. Marina speaks English, German, French, and Arabic. And fortunately for us today here at PMI UK, we're going to do it in English. So please join me in a virtual warm welcome to Marina.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And I'd like to actually jump and dive straight into a topic which is close to cultural perceptions and cultural awareness and cultural competency. What assumptions have you already made about me? I would like to ask you to answer these questions quickly so that I can see what your perceptions about me are. So that takes me to resolving. I know there's probably more people of you who want to answer the question, but I'd like to also keep the dynamics of this session today quite slower paced so that we get a lot of topics covered today in this session. So thank you very much. Let's see what the results look like. Well, true about me is I am a scuba diver. I've learned scuba diving in Australia and continued to do diving in Egypt if traveling is allowed. I'm also a Queen aficionado. I'm an enthusiastic Queen fan, but it also is a bit of a play because I also mean with the Queen, not only the head of state of the UK, but also the band, the music band, because I have a background in creative project management in the music business. And yes, I love the Egyptian cuisine, and I'll have a little venture there cooking like Cleopatra, although the Queen probably has never really cooked herself, but I know she has culinary expertise, and I was always following the Egyptian cuisine and delicacies there. So thank you for participating, and that takes me to the title of today's session, Cultural Pitfalls in International Project Management. Well, we are all involved with international project management, and I would like you to explore today a little bit more about what are the cultural pitfalls, but also looking into how culture actually impacts international project management. And one of the key insights I'd like to share with you is how we often get trapped in common sense and what we can do. So I introduce you to a framework of cultural dimensions to actually counteract those cultural pitfalls. So beginning the journey here. And let me start with a powerful quote of Peter Drucker, a management consultant and author, who has actually created this wonderful idiom called culture eats strategy for breakfast. And this is really what I think is the core message I'd like you to take away from today. Whatever you plan in your projects, don't forget culture. And if you're ignoring culture, it will be one of the biggest pitfalls of all pitfalls, which I'm introducing today. Part of this is also, let me just briefly introduce a little case study. I have worked in the German, British, cross-cultural cross-cultural training quite a lot in terms of mergers and acquisitions, as well as cultural awareness and cultural competency trainings. And in this case, I have been come across a case study, which is ThyssenKrupp, who probably know is one of the biggest steel companies, a German one, who was actually venturing out to Brazil about 10 years ago, and they wanted to set up a new production site there. And that was in collaboration with the Brazilian project management team, as well as with the Chinese, because they have had the infrastructural building contract tendered for successfully. And the hope was high. The project was internationally set up already between three main cultures. And everybody was hoping that the project was giving a lot of benefits. We had cheaper ways of operating because the sites were cheaper, the workforce, the whole infrastructure was actually looked very successful. But then culture hit. And the whole project, it was about 7 years, was literally struggling because of the different cultural dimensions, the different cultural aspects of ways of working together, which completely jeopardized this project. And I can tell you, monies have been lost, as well as reputation and trust in the company themselves. It was a very, very big blow to ThyssenKrupp, and they really had struggled to for a long time to actually regain all the losses they have experienced. So take this really serious, as I would like to introduce. And then here's an overview of 6 cultural pitfalls, and there are probably many more, but I'd like to focus on these 6, which are close to my heart because they are culture related. And we're talking about risk aspects and the way how we actually go about risk as project managers, as well as the counter culture we are dealing with, how we solve problems, how we make decisions, how we participate. And this participation aspect is also particularly focusing on communication. And formality, there are of course business etiquettes as well as communication etiquettes, meeting etiquettes involved, which are actually also quite specific to the cultural work set and leadership styles, whether you are more a hierarchical leader or a more managerial egalitarian. We're going to look into this in a minute. So, and this is a very big risk factor. Having spoken about the external risk factors, whenever you're interacting with culture in terms of interacting with cultures, this is the risk culture within yourself, your unconscious bias. If you look into those 5 questions, that actually also should reveal how complex culture can even be within yourself. Asking questions about, do I lack real respect for or sensitivity for cultural differences? In how far do I rely heavily on cultural stereotypes? Ooh, it's a dangerous one. Stereotypes in cultural settings are actually quite detrimental to any trust building or confidence building and relationship building. And also, do I lack awareness of how cultural influences behave, how cultural actually influences my behavior and other behaviors. So we need to really be aware of all these questions, and how do we answer them? Do we answer them with a clear knowledge of and confidence, or do we answer them with, oh, I really perhaps have to look into preparing myself better? And this session should give you an introduction to those unconscious biases as well as the external risk factors. So let's dive in. What is culture? And I'd like you to use your Mentimeter again quickly to give me maybe a 1-word or 2-word definition what you think culture is. So, wow, there we are. Fantastic. This is a great contribution here. A frame of references, education, absolutely, traditions, behavior, way of life, the way how we do things, behaviors, attitudes. You can see it's a very, very complex topics. And how can we possibly navigate through the complexity of this? Well, rest assured, I have brought you a little bit of a framework today, which gives you the opportunity to get a bit more sense of the complexity of culture and how we can best make this happen in our interactions in terms of managing and delivering projects successfully. Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much for the contributions here, very valuable. And we will share those contributions after the event as well. So the learning keeps even going after the event. Thank you. I'll move on and want to briefly introduce you to the cultural iceberg, which is often used as a model, which we use in terms of a metaphor which simplifies a complex topic. And we can see here we have the tip of the iceberg being a visible, or let's say with our senses perceivable. So we can literally see, hear, smell, taste, touch culture in all sorts of expressions. We call it the explicit culture. So anything around architecture, whenever we go sightseeing, whenever we go visiting other countries, just think about the food we are experiencing and tasting, and all sorts of languages and behaviors we're observing, languages we're hearing, and so on and so forth. But what we are looking into today is the more invisible part of culture. And you can see some of your responses earlier would probably be found in this area here, where we can see all the complex answers of what culture might be. I also brought a definition along. So a set of definitions, and you can choose whatever. I think all of these definitions have their real application. And yes, there are some of them which may as well be very relevant in terms of how we build trust, for example. And I'll ask you in a minute, what would be your way of connecting with people from different cultures straight away? Would it be through a different aspect of focusing on task, or rather relationships? How do you discover rules which are lived by? Many rules are hidden, and it takes quite a while actually to discover those rules. Only maybe if you're interacting with a new culture for a lengthy time. So you can see the complexity of this terminology. And what I also brought along is one of the cultural pioneers who has developed a framework, which is the Culture Collides, is Dr. Richard D. Lewis, and he has mapped the cultures across the world according to their values. Yeah, the values of what is important to them, how they actually build trust, as we initially said, is about relationship building. Some of them have a more a reflective approach, for example, the Asian countries and cultures, as you can see on the right-hand side here. But we also find that the Hispanic cultures, also African cultures, Arabic cultures, are very multi-active cultures. They are, multi-active in terms of really emotionally expressive, but also multitasking. So they do many, many things at the same time, but they also have a more people-focused approach. And then you will find more the Western countries and cultures such as the US, Germany, Switzerland, UK, who are really cultures who have a more process-oriented and project-managed oriented approach. So you may as well find most of your familiarities with how you deal with projects on the left-hand side. But if you venture out to wanting to do business with other cultures, then you probably have to consider some of those differences, which I would like to explore with you in a minute. What do you see? This is one of the optical illusions which I'd like you to just have a look at. And yeah, I have this question often answered in many, many settings, and there are so many aha moments involved with this. Maybe some of you are already familiar with this picture. Most of the people, depending, whatever it depends on, see either a young lady or an old lady. For those people who wouldn't necessarily see any of those, I like to see that my work as a culture coach is literally breaking down the two visible ladies or invisible ladies and help you to see both. For those who only see the young lady is a lady who has her hair here, her ear, her chin, and she literally looks into that direction. If you can see my cursor, then you see where she's actually looking at. She's got a nice feather boa here and a nice veil. And then there's an old lady. The old lady is a lady who has two eyes and a nose and a mouth. So if you were looking at the young lady's necklace being the old lady's mouth, I think that is the very moment for most of you who would then start flicking around and see suddenly both ladies. So have a play with it. And the reason I'm actually introducing you to this is really that we only see who we are. This optical illusion, again, look at this. What do you see? Either two faces or a vase. And again, I'm playing around, but it's quite nice to have this experiential experience here to see what we actually only want to see is one perspective. And as soon as we enter the intercultural stage, we have to be aware that there are more perspectives than the only one we are familiar with. That takes me to the first cross-cultural case. So look at this little cartoon here. This is an advert which has been very successful in Europe. And it's pretty much straightforward, I would say. There's a gentleman on the left-hand side here feeling sick, probably need to go to the bathroom. He actually decided to go for a medicine and he feels better. So this advert didn't work in the Middle East. And I'd like you to help me to find the reason why. Please type in the Mentimeter just now, what could be the reason why this advert didn't work in the Middle East? So interesting. I can see some great participations. Yes. Yeah, we have the cross, reactive culture, symbols. Okay, cross meaning. There is one who's already given me the right answer here, and I'll wait for other. Yes. So there's two here who I can already see have answered it correctly. And I can tell you the winner is, if there was a winner, they read from right to left. So if you think about the advert going back, if you read that advert from right to left, well, I'm happy now, I take this pill and now I feel sick. That is exactly what could happen when you take things for granted. Thank you very much for the participations here. And one of the key findings is literally the framework of Dr. Gerd Hofstetter. He was the cultural pioneer in terms of creating a framework of cultural dimensions. And he established a nice quote here. We all view the world through our own cultural glasses. And that is part of the perception we are getting taken away. We think what we think in our culture, which we have been brought up with, is the only point of reference. And that is dangerous because we take our own culture for common sense, and common sense doesn't work in a new cultural setting. So common sense becomes uncommon sense. Common sense, don't fall for it because it can be dangerous. Don't make assumptions. And whenever we are entering the cross-cultural or international stage, we always have to be aware about our own perception and the perception of others. So that means we are maybe experiencing something like, for example, my own experience, for example, was when I came to the UK, having been brought up in Germany, I didn't know queuing was so important for the British. So without knowing, I just entered the queue at the bus station and thought, oh, I may as well just move on, and got suddenly some glances around me, noticing some sound, not necessarily spoken words. People have given me feedback there is something not right in my behavior. And what I'm saying here is that what we take for granted, common sense, is not necessarily working in other cultures. And other cultures, and that is another big takeaway here, are not as explicit with their feedback. They wouldn't necessarily tell you, you could have actually, joined the queue at the end of the queue. It's something which they don't explicitly mention to you. And that's the reason why you have to be looking out for many more clues other than just the spoken word to gather feedback for your behavior. And that is another valid point. So that takes us to my cross-cultural case study, which I brought today. I give you a couple of minutes to read through it, and then I will ask you the question.
Hi, Marina. While the people are just reading through that, I just want to remind you that we're well on time today, so we're good for time right now.
Thank you. So I hope you have all been able to read this story, the little case study here, and I'll move on to asking you the question, what actually happened here? So if you want to use the Mentimeter again for us to gather your evaluation of this situation, Much appreciated. So we can always see some very valid contributions here, that we have no handover activity. Yes, info was missing, exactly. Yes, time zones are different. Wanted to get Roger's confirmation first. She was politely telling her she can't really work on it. Yeah, that's all very, very good. I thank you very much for those contributions. It actually shows us how complex, again, different ways of evaluating a situation here is. And again, we would like to also consider that project management in an international setting is very complex. And we also want to make sure that the complexity is actually going to help us, with the help of a framework, to make it a bit simpler, more simply and understandable, and so that we have the opportunity to get quicker to analyzing a situation, and then also looking into finding a solution going forward. I like Kent was thrown under the bus. Misinterpreting a promise. Oh, absolutely. And this is fantastic. I really, really enjoy these contributions here, because it actually shows us that everybody reads situations, although it is the one and same case study, in so many different ways. So let's look into how can we actually deal with this. And the idea is, this is a report case study, which I will come back to again later on in this session, after I have introduced you to the framework, which could help you as well to analyze the situation in a different way, in a more clearer way. Thank you very much. So, cultural dimensions. Cultural dimensions is a framework which Dr. Gert Hofstetter has introduced us as cross-cultural consultants. We're using this framework quite substantially, because it helps us to navigate through the complexity of the hidden parts of the iceberg. So if you were, for example, having to join into a new project, and you're the project manager, and having to, let's say, being introduced to introduce your team of, let's say, 10 different nationalities, how can you make sense of all those different ways of building trust, dealing with time, using hierarchy, risk, how is your attitude towards risk, and how do we communicate? All these aspects are very, very complex to understand, and the cultural dimensions framework can actually help you to get clarity here. And it should actually make ourselves and our lives easier in the international project world. So project planning and realization is the first one, where I introduce the way how we actually work and how we go about projects. So this is, let's say, a very, very simplified, I'm completely aware, a very simplified model of the 3 phases of a project. In different cultures, this is exactly what I would like to highlight. We have a planning stage, a decision-making stage, and an implementation stage. And I can reassure you, those 3 stages are interpreted in cultures very, very differently. Just think about in the planning stage, I've worked with a lot of German engineers in the automotive industry, and planning and analytical skills are absolutely paramount. So they, particularly also as Germans, who are very, very analytically in their analytical approach, they would concentrate on the planning stage in order to avoid risk. Risk management is one of their key strengths in their project planning, but it also is a cultural value for them. They try to actually avoid risk, and they have a very, very high value on feeling safe and secure. And that actually reflects in their way how they go about planning. It also doesn't necessarily only need to be a national culture issue. It can also be a project management attitude against risk. Planning is a very valid undertaking to do in order to avoid risk. And risk management is part of the project management skill set anyway. But what I'm aiming at here is also how those 3 areas, which are culturally related in terms of planning, taking, let's say, in the German culture, about 80%, let's say, and decision making probably only 5, because they did all the work already. And when it comes to implementation, everybody knows what needs to be done because it has extensively been planned and mapped out. When we look into, for example, the UK, and the UK British culture is actually quite associated with being quite pragmatic, means the planning stage is actually so much shorter. We're talking about probably 20%, 50, 25%. Also, the decision-making process is much shorter. We're talking about maybe also 5%. But it also shows us that the implementation stage, therefore, takes much longer. And that is also perhaps reflected in the British culture being a quite communicative culture. They're using milestones as in, adjusting those goal meetings, goal 1 and goal 2 as milestone meetings to actually constantly adjust whether the project is actually on its way to be implemented in the correct way, in the aimed way. And that shows that the pragmatic approach to planning is it's so much shorter because they just want to get into doing mode and implementation mode. That can be a very cultural related attitude towards project planning. Now think about, let's say, China. If you were going to China, for example, you would probably have a big block of decision making, probably 30, 40, maybe 50%. And that has a lot to do with how the hierarchical structure of this culture is set out. They would often have only representatives in, let's say, the project meeting being there. And once a decision has been made within the project meeting, that person, that representative of a Chinese business, for example, would go back to relay the questions being asked or to actually have the decision made by other superiors other than the person who has actually attended the project meeting. So it's a very complex topic here that you as an international project manager have to take on board when it comes to those areas of cultural impact on the 3 phases of a project. So my question to you now is, how do I approach a new work project? So question here is, how do you focus? Do you focus on task or rather on relationship? Is the task more important so that the way how you build trust is the competency in the room? Or would I have to start with relationship building first in order to establish trust and then go down to the business? And this is a very, very valid question to ask because here we have maybe the different cultural clashes already. I mean, I've been brought up in a German-Egyptian cultural background, and I've experienced that many times when I came to Egypt with working with colleagues and friends. Their way of going about business is all about relationship. Have a cup of tea first, and really talking about families and friends and the latest events before you actually even think about business-related topics. And that is a very valid discovery here as well. Even if we assume, and again, we're talking about assumptions, even if we assume that we are all down to business, we are all down to project management, and we all want to have successful projects, you can't assume just for the sake of that everybody is down to business and therefore everybody knows what to do, everybody is task focused. So we will experience, and I can see that here from the voting situation here already, that there is a fine balance, but it is still sort of like a perception gap here. The reason I'm asking you is here, remember what you voted for, just to give you an indication, because I would like to take you to the next slide, which is a nice way to map the different ways of how we interact with task orientation and relationship orientation. I have an example here. When we are in project management and we are operating in a task orientation mode, we're probably also more likely to give very straightforward feedback. And we tend to also remind our colleagues or our team members quite straightforward about a negative feedback. So if I, for example, come from a German background and have experienced that, you wouldn't get any praise for your work because it's, you know, self-explanatory. You're just doing your job, so why should I get any praise for it? But on the other hand, if you have a negative experience or just you know, a task not very well performed on, you will immediately get that negative feedback from your superior or even from your colleagues. So there's a very quite straightforward task orientation approach to feedback. And then there are other cultures, and I've learned that from, you know, moving to the UK, that the way how they work is much more aligned with their pragmatic approach of project and work styles, which is all about relationship. And you can't just confront people straight with a direct feedback. You rather go and use it in a very indirect way to say, you know, how can you learn from what you've just made as a mistake? It's not sort of much about feeling somebody has made a big mistake and would have to take responsibility, as they would, for example, in a more analytical, in a more task orientation culture. You would rather want to encourage your colleague, your team member, to try again. Yeah. So these are very valid aspects to look into, how also cultures across the globe are actually dealing with negative and indirect and direct negative feedback. So I'd like you to make a mental note of that, because it can be very valuable for you to also think about, you know, what is your preference? And also, how would you like to be giving feedback as a manager, or want to be also receive feedback? That takes me to the next point of risk, the concept of time. You probably also have experienced in many situations, maybe through holidays, but also business meetings, how many people are actually on time or have a little bit of a more flexible approach to time. Here we go. My question to you again is, how late is late? So there is some flexibility for some cultures. Others insist on being punctual. So what is your flexibility with time? How many minutes would you allow, for example, to be still on time, or be more flexible and maybe allow to up to 120 minutes? I've seen that happening. So be very curious about your perception there and experience. Fantastic. I'm really curious here, because I have experience, and I can see somebody has definitely answered around looks like 90 minutes. So I know we have some sort of flexible time understandings in terms of the academic quota, which the Germans always like 15 minutes, but the Germans are really, they're really on time, a very punctual culture. It is actually an offense and actually a trust destroying behavior if you're not arriving on time. So imagine been brought up mainly in the German culture, but we also have had business and family and friend meetings in Egypt. I was really shocked when a friend of mine with his colleague actually didn't arrive until perhaps two hours later, just excusing himself. Oh yeah, the traffic in Cairo has just been so busy. I was constantly looking at my watch and said, that's not true. He doesn't even mention, and he didn't make any notes in terms of, I'm going to be running late. So he was expecting my patients to be part of their relationship-oriented culture, being more flexible. And he just said, you are not flexible. And I said, okay, but this is really, I already noticed there is a culture clash here in the perception of time. And what it also means is, you will probably experience a nice saying there from the Egyptian point of view. Well, you've got the clocks, you want to be punctual, but we have the time, we can be flexible. So how does the concept of time actually, again, relate to different cultures. And you can see, of course, Germany, you wouldn't expect anything different, being very linear, on time. Everything is literally planned through project management, planned really. And Switzerland, of course, they're famous for their Swiss watches. But you can also see Japan being the masterminds behind the just-in-time management. You know, it isn't a surprise, although Japan is an Asian culture, but you can see they have a particular cultural value on time. And then you can see on the right-hand scale, flexible time understanding, Arabic, African cultures, also Latin American cultures are very, very flexible in time. And think about, again, make a mental note here, how would you address time differences there? And if you're insisting on a linear time frame, how would you counteract with other people from other cultures? And this is really what we're actually aiming at. Acknowledging that there are two different perceptions here. There's a linear time understanding and a flexible time understanding, and it literally translates through all different dimensions. We call it dimensions because it's literally the stretch between the two concepts here. And we want to step away from there is a right or a wrong way. Yeah, if we start to embrace that as soon as we are on a cultural stage, intercultural stage, that there is no longer a right or wrong. There's only what helps or what doesn't help. In the concept of us, let's say, wanting to work in an international team on an international project, if we find that in the initial stage of setting up a project meeting, an initial project meeting to kick everything off, you probably want to be a bit more flexible to allow every cultural representative to come through and introduce themselves. But you also want to make sure that, that everybody else is happy in understanding each other. And then also making, well, adaptability compromises, or let's say adaptable decisions on how can we manage all of this coming from the linear time approach as well as from the flexible time approach to find a common ground to be able to work together successfully and productively. The next risk factor is hierarchy and leadership style. And that takes me to the next question here. Again, how would you or how should power and authority be distributed? Would you rather accept and prefer an egalitarian approach or more a status-related approach? So egalitarian is more lean managed. That means every competency within the team members is has got his space, and the leader, the team leader, the project leader, is literally facilitating all the competency here. You may as well also find other cultures who have put a big emphasis on status. That means the boss is literally making decisions and also is the power in the room, the authority in the room, and doesn't really accept any challenges from their team members. So again, we can see here by the way how you asked and answered the questions that there is also something like a blind spot. The differences between 3.8 and 6.4, which you just see here on the scale, is literally the blind spot where you actually have to, wherever you sit with your answers, this blind spot actually has to be bridged. It's that gap between those different cultural perceptions of power and authority. And how does that translate into the different leadership styles across the globe, across different cultures? You can see a more egalitarian approach in some of the Western cultures in terms of like Denmark and Netherlands and Sweden, Australia, Israel. And you can also find that the UK and US is actually kind of sort of in the middle here, interesting enough, and Germany has a very I would say Germany has in some stages and areas and sectors, for example, a very hierarchical approach, but it's a different hierarchical approach because it's hierarchy through competency. You will often find that the competent project managers with all their expertise and their technical knowledge will actually get promoted into their hierarchical positions because of their knowledge. It's not so much hierarchy based on status, whereas we move on into the more hierarchical region of here on the right hand side, you will find most of those countries and cultures have often a more status related approach to hierarchy. Status, let's say by birth, for example, there's a king, maybe even with Japan we have the emperor, sorry, and also maybe tribes in terms of the elders, for example. I have done business in Egypt where it's still very important that you have the oldest project management leader in the room, although maybe a younger project management leader has also been allocated to the project. You would always have to consult with the older in order to get approval. Even if you are the more competent person. Again, you would really want to value those different dimensions, acknowledge them, and see how you can make that adaptation happening from both sides, of course. And another big one is risk. How do we actually avoid risk? And how do I make decisions in ambiguous situations? Again, I ask you here, what is your preference here? Do you prefer risk, prefer rapid decision making and quick results, place great importance on flexibility and initiative, or do you rather go for certainty, spend significant time on background research, establish procedures before starting any project? Interesting here. There seems to be like a neck on neck decision coming forward here, how people make decisions. Thank you very much for the contributions here. And I'd like to also take that into the evaluation. How does that translate into the international stage, and how we also go about different decision-making approaches here. So there's a more consensual decision-making process, for example, in place in countries and cultures such as the Japanese and the Swedish and the Netherlands and Germany. But we also find a more top-down. So consensual is you literally consult with your experts in the room, with your competent team members in your team. And also when it comes to top-down is the one and only person makes a decision most of the time, the project leader. And again, you find those more top-down decision-making processes in this area here. And I mentioned China earlier in terms of how decisions are made. Often the decision maker is not in the project team themselves. They may as well have a team of superiors who may as well even have a staggered approach, staged approach to make decisions there. And communication. Of course, communication is key and translates into all different cultural pitfalls there. And here I brought a little comic. I give you a minute to read.
Marina, hi, sorry, just to say we've got around 12, 13 minutes to go, and also if we're going to include some questions in that time as well.
Excellent, thank you very much, Nigel. So when it comes to intercultural communication styles, of course, I would like to ask you again, what is your preference? How do I communicate requests, tasks, and feedback? What is your preference here? More direct, forthright, and factual, or more indirect, subtle, explaining? So again, I can see here very balanced almost approach to direct and indirect communication. And again, make a mental note here. that what we take for granted, oh, we are in project management mode, wouldn't everybody also just go down to business and go down to projects and being direct and forthright and factual? No, there is still a need to respect and acknowledge that there are other cultures within the project teams, even within our project session here today, who prefer rather to be more indirect in their way of communicating. And that brings us to another evaluation here. How does that translate into the intercultural world here? We can see that direct communication is very prevalent in Denmark, Netherlands, and Sweden and Australia. Germany, interestingly, is just here in the middle. Ooh, my experience was, the Germans communicate completely different to the way how the British communicate. The British, just shown on that picture before, very indirect. One even says about the British, they have a coded speech. That means their indirectness is often what they say is not necessarily what they mean. And from my perspective as a German, being brought up in the German culture, I felt that the British were very indirect. So look where they actually sit on that scale here. What does that actually mean? It actually also means that everything which we are discussing here today is all relative. Your cultural upbringing, your cultural reference is, or your cultural background is your reference point, how you relate to other cultures. It doesn't actually matter if you say, oh, I'm a direct communicator, and there's the indirect communicator, and I'm just kind of stereotyping, expecting that everybody who sits on the right-hand scale here, Japanese, Russian, and so on, are automatically indirect communicators. No, you will also find that within those cultural representatives, you also have, even, in indirect communication cultures, you have direct communicators, and vice versa. You would also have indirect communicators in direct communication cultures. It's all a point of reference. You literally have to look out how indirect and direct does it actually feel from your cultural point of view. That brings me back to the cultural case study which we had earlier. And you may as well remember when I asked you in terms of what happened, we had a variety of different answers there. But I'd like you to now look at this case again with the perspective of having those cultural dimensions in mind. And let me just briefly remind you, we have spoken about the way how we communicate, the way how we actually go about time, the way how we had different leadership and decision-making styles, and also how we are dealing with risk. So if you're using those different dimensions here, you would probably find yourself more confident in using those dimensions as a toolkit for you to analyze this cross-cultural case with much more confidence and also with much more transparency, because you can literally go back as Lynn and say, Kent, you could have actually given me some more opportunity to relay what is actually the issues you have, because in literal fact, both have literally talked very indirectly. They have communicated very indirectly. And if there was no direct communication by making it more specific in terms, what is the timeline the client is here expecting, for example? And also having a more direct approach in terms of, what are you expecting from me? Can that not be also wait until tomorrow, until Raju is back, is also a time dimensional aspect here. So I hope you can see what I'm aiming at. Those cultural dimensions can actually help all team members. And we don't know the relationship between Lynn and Kent in terms of hierarchy. Even if they were, let's say, Lynn is superior to Kent, she could have also asked a bit more about either Kent's contribution to say, how do you see it and what is actually possible within your way of working, the more egalitarian approach, or we would have had her making a clear decision, okay, this is what we need. The client has actually asked us for doing this and that. So you can see there's also an element of risk which hasn't really been managed properly. And again, how would Lynn make decisions if she can't even rely on Kent and his being reliable in terms of delivering? So when a report is not being delivered, you would want to rather find out what is the reason, and you can use those cultural dimensions to analyze them. On the right-hand side, of course, you can see all those hidden sort of thought trains, which of course are in a dialogue not necessarily apparent, but you can actually see what assumptions people are making about each other without explicitly talking about it. And that is where the friction comes in, where unconscious bias comes in and literally stops us from doing a good job and delivering the project successfully. So again, we have got a question here, but I'm moving on because I've just answered the questions here. So I think we want to really kind of wrap up here in terms of what is important to take away from today. In terms of the cultural risks, which I introduced earlier, the 6 pitfalls, we have them listed here on the left-hand side in that circle again. So we're looking into problem solving, the way how we communicate, the way how we go about time and manage time, and leadership styles, as well as our attitude towards risk and the different work styles. With that in mind, everybody on an international project team should be able to acknowledge the cultural differences and build cultural intelligence. And cultural intelligence is literally acknowledging the framework, creating self-awareness, and also the awareness for the other culture you're actually dealing with, and being able to code switch. This is the actual capability to acknowledge both perceptions, both cultural dimensions, and making it work that both cultures can work together. Yeah, so really making adjustments so that both can make their collaboration productive and successful. That brings me to the end of our session in terms of presentation. And I like to finish with this quote, which I really love. No strangers here, just friends you haven't yet met. So this is literally the philosophy, my mission and my passion, actually, that we often make assumptions about people because we don't know them, and we haven't really explored what is actually behind what we think is stereotyping. We should actually make the effort to get to know people better and really overcome cultural barriers in order to work with them productively and successfully together. And in the end, if you have delivered a project successfully, how often did your team members have become friends? So I'll open the panel now to the question and answers. But first, we would like to ask you, what have you learned or will do differently as a result of attending this webinar?
Hi, Marina, it's Nigel again here. Just while people and folks put their responses into that question, I'm just very respectful of time, because in being British, we want to finish on time today, just to show that we've got some German qualities in us, of course. But I just want, as people put those comments in, I just want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge today. And also just remind everyone that you will be sent a link with all the recorded materials and contents from today's session, and details of our webinar back catalogue, and also the all-important PDU code for PMI members. It will be on in a following slide as well. I just want to say that today I'll be Nigel Smith and your host. Marina, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I really trust that you enjoyed it. And we very much look forward to inviting you to our future events. But I also have to give extended thanks to other members of the PMI UK digital team, most notably Merv, who's sorting through all the questions at the moment, and also a particular shout out to both Carla Miranda, Carl Buxton and Jodie Walker, who have been there to take care of all the back office admin for the PMI UK website. And thank you, Marina. We've just got a list here of the upcoming webinars over the next 6 weeks or so, and our next one is on the 31st of July. For those interested in Agile, we've got a big panel discussion on that day. We've got our very own Hugo Mini from the PMI UK digital team talking to us about benefits realisation on the 11th of August. I'm happy to say that I'm standing in on the 9th of September to do a session all around public speaking and presenting, both virtually and online, and trying to dispel a few of those myths. And we've had a new one introduced yesterday. We've got Kevin Parry coming on the 17th of September, the biggest challenge in managing benefits. Full details are available on the PMI.uk.org website. And Marina, if you could just forward, yes, thank you, the PDU code for those patiently waiting for that. It's CO75 7PUBNW. That's C075 7PUBNW. And as I mentioned at the start of the presentation from Marina, apologies, there's been very little time for any questions during the hour we had this morning. But actually, Marina is now going to stay behind for up to about 20-30 minutes to answer questions directly. And I will say that we're recording this webinar, so all the Q&A will be contained within the video recording, which will be made available as an on-demand webinar. So with that in mind, for those of you that do need to leave us now, we're just coming up to 1 o'clock. Thanks for your attendance today. Just want to now hand across to Merv, just to see, Merv, what questions have we got coming in from our audience today?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who's attended. Really, really good numbers and really high levels of interaction. In fact, I think sometimes that level of interaction then keeps people so busy that they don't send in questions. But we do have some questions in here, and I've got questions of my own, so we can discuss those as we move on. Got a whole list of great questions from Salim, who we've said actually we will open, excuse me, his or her mic, I'm not sure, but they can then ask their own questions, but we won't do that until we get down to a more manageable number of attendees. Some great questions too from Eileen and Lorraine. So I think what we'll do, we'll pick up on those, and then perhaps we'll bring in Salim as well. So from Lorraine, how would you distinguish cultural leadership from general leadership?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes. Well, I think it comes in terms of any leadership, in terms of being self-aware is a good starting point. And you would probably also say that the cultural leadership is something where you would acknowledge there are cultural differences, and yes, there are also behavioral differences. And the spectrum of different leadership styles is also somewhere prevalent in different cultures that you have to be aware. Even if you were using your leadership within, let's say, your team being more egalitarian, if your team, for example, travels, let's say, to a highly status-oriented cultural setting, you can't just only continue with your egalitarian leadership style. So in that term, you would combine your leadership style in general with that of the cultural. It really is depending on the situation and the project you're dealing with. Hope that answered your questions?
Yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. I think it fits in, and Lorraine says, great, thank you. So yes, bang on. I think it fits in with another question, which was one of Salim's, which is around sort of who do you tune your the culture to. So what I'm thinking here is in terms of, is that based on the client, or is it based on the supplier? So who has to make the move?
That's a super question, and that I've been asked this question very, very often. In particular, and let me just give you a setting here. In mergers and acquisitions, for example, it's a very prevalent question. I have been doing cultural trainings, particularly in those settings where one company has acquired another. And let's say we had a British and a German company, British company being acquired by a German. You would expect that the British had to submit to the German culture? No. Or even if you had a merger and acquisition, an American company have been purchased by or acquired by a Chinese, there is no right or wrong or superior. In an ideal cross-cultural setting, you would have to decide what are your objectives. And you have to make decision for this objective, which culture suits best. And you may as well have to use all those cultural dimensions which I introduced earlier to then decide which one of those dimensions help us to achieve our goals. And only that is the valid framework you can actually use. If you were going in and say, oh, they have purchased us, so we only have to give in and give up our cultural preferences, that doesn't work. So you literally have to change or adapt a new cultural framework which is suitable for all the project objectives which are going to be to achieve.
And how do you think things have changed in terms of lockdown? Because I get the focus, I get the idea that the focus could be on a group of people in country that have a culture for themselves, as opposed to everyone in working from home, etc. So how do you kind of accommodate that significant shift?
Where do you see the shift there, Merv?
Well, I see in terms of you may be working with a project group, the client may be, who up until very recently, they worked within a single office. So it was easier to have those kind of meetings. Now they're distributed. So what is the impact of that on, you know, productivity and getting work done, etc.?
Oh yeah. I mean, it has definitely a very strong impact. And we're talking about definitely things are slowing down. That's for sure, because it is more fragmented. You as let's say, we're talking about a globally connected manager, a leader, project team leader. You would also have to look out for many more clues when it comes to communication. The whole communication landscape has changed dramatically. And I observe that as something where you say, even let's say more task-oriented project leader would have to embrace more communication and relationship-oriented behavior, particularly in the light of looking at aspects of lone workers, home workers who are more isolated. They don't have the interaction with their team members. So imagine all the information and communication activities which are happening here are no longer as a dynamic process which happens in project teams when they see each other, when they're sharing the same room or the same building. That kind of accidental, oh, you know, once I see you here, Merv, can you just ask me that question? It's not happening. So you've been literally physically disconnected, and that has have to be compensated by a project leader, also the team members, to allow for extra additional communication time and facilities which allow the small talks, the relationship building interactivity, as well as the exchange about the project itself, the task, and so on. Just think about how can you create transparency on workload. If somebody is just going to, you know, be more idle and think, oh, you know, I have actually got capacity, but I'm not communicating it to anyone. So, you know, how would you as a project leader make sure that everybody has enough to do, and that not somebody is in your team is overwhelmed and the other is just idle or has less to do? So okay. These are, yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. In fact, Lorraine's come back again. She's doing her thesis on post-merger cultural integration, and asks, is it possible to find a cultural framework template anywhere? I'm sure that you would be interested in helping out on that.
A cultural framework on that, or there's many. I mean, I introduced you to some of the great representatives, and if you want to really dive into, Lorraine, into reading more background into cultural integration and cross-cultural intelligence building, we have authors such as Dr. Gerd Hofstetter, who is actually the pioneer in introducing to cultural dimensions, and some of them I've actually quoted here earlier. We also have Dr. von Strompenaars, who is another pioneer and cultural scientist who actually evolved Dr. Gerd Hofstetter's work further. We're also looking to, and one of the most practical case study oriented and I find it very entertaining in some places, is Erin Meyer's The Culture Map. We also use different cultural assessment tools, which are also very, very relevant. In my line of work as a cultural agility coach, I use a cultural assessment tool, which actually helps us to create the awareness for where I am and how do I actually need to bridge the gap to the other culture. And that can also be used in individual settings as well as in team settings. And when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, this is all about teams, how they can be working together more productively by gaining and learning about cultural intelligence.
Okay, that's great. We've still got some 65 on here, but I'm going to take a bit of a risk now and see if we can open the mic for Salim and see whether she, I apologise, can put their own questions. So I think if I click here to self-muted, but I think I've unmuted. Salim,
Hi,
welcome.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, welcome.
Okay.
Some great questions. I'll allow you to prioritize them.
That's quite a fascinating subject, so thanks very much, Marina. Now, a couple of questions I'm asking for some of your practical opinion, like about the timepiece. You mentioned flexibility. Now, in practical, what might be the better way to deal with those flexible elements, adding those as when dealing with individual task or schedule estimates, or overall risk profile because of your working with certain cultural countries? So that can be done in a different way, but I'm not sure which one might be more practical in your experience. So if you are dealing with the flexible people, like things may take 2 days or 5 days or 60 days. So, but it might be based on specific technical task, or it could be general overall work environment because of the country you're working in. So what is an indication of those impacts, so choosing one way or other?
I hope I understood your question correctly here. You're looking about how can you overcome the different time attitudes towards flexible or more.
That's correct. Yeah, but when you consider within your project or planning, how would you account those flexible cultures or flexible time concepts in your practice?
I mean, one of the key, again, it's a learning piece. That's the reason why I encourage with every international project team to first and foremost acknowledge that there are different time concepts there. And that means you can't just only say, oh, you're constantly late, because late is no longer, in terms of culturally acceptable. But when we're talking about a project which we want to deliver on time, on budget, and on quality, we want to make sure that the time factor doesn't jeopardize the project. So that means even the cultures who have a more flexible approach need to be learning what it means to be more punctual or in time, or looking at attending maybe the milestone meetings which are lined up as the process and the project-oriented approach is necessary. So these cultures have to learn to be more linear, and the linear would also have to be learning to maybe apply for more buffer time and apply for more flexible time if needed when it comes to some areas in the project. So both have actually got to learn and literally then find a common ground under which you actually are able to say, okay, we need maybe, for example, small talk, 10 minutes for every project meeting is allowed, is that flexible element. But when it comes to the actual project meeting, we are now really following the agenda and make sure that the points are covered, which we need to be covering. Does that help you, Salim, to answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. Mary, I have a question, Mom. I don't want to hijack your agenda. I can carry on with the next or two, if you like.
You can have one more question, Salim.
Okay, one more. I'll select a good one. On your common sense piece, and I just tried to relate to the governance issues. Your UK queuing example, I can give the same example from myself. In Germany, I can't even consider crossing the traffic, the pedestrian crossing with a red light on 3 a.m. in the morning. So there's element of those common sense, but some of those are governed by rules and regulations. Now, do you think if there's some risk of dealing with the common sense, is it better to introduce governance even people like it or not?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, this is another, I mean, cultural dimensions is a very complex topic in its own right, because you can actually expand those dimensions. I've only I've mentioned 5 today, but there are many more. And one of this, which is von Strompenaars, has actually related that to aspects of rules and governance, which are very important, how they are actually interpreted, because some of them put the law beyond human beings and the way how human relationships are dealt with. And other cultures, which are often labeled by the Western as being corrupt, are actually putting the human relationship above the law. Yeah, so there are case studies and even examples. As I said, it would have been, it's normally a whole training day, which we actually are covering
Sure.
this topic with.
Sure.
But what I'm just trying to mention here is that you, of course, have to also allow people in different cultures to also familiarize themselves with the legal framework, with the governance and the rules which are necessary for a project to be successfully delivered. Absolutely. There's a learning piece there as well, which I call the etiquette part, but it's also with compliance aligned.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Salim. Thank you.
Okay, there's a couple of potential questions. I've asked both Petra and Libby if they want me to open their mics, but whilst I'm waiting for an answer, we'll just quickly deal with a question from Eileen, who has had to leave, but I thought it was a really good question. And it's, how would you deal with aspects of culture that you fundamentally disagree with, but don't want to be seen to condone? So if you're conflicted in that way.
Oh, well, I mean, this is part of your, I actually mentioned that earlier, your unconscious bias is a big hindering factor, a risk factor in any intercultural work. And I know we can't exclude ourselves to be stereotyping and making assumptions, because it's, in literal fact, I would like to be positive about it. It's a way how we react instinctively. Because we make instinctive decision whether a situation or a person is felt to be dangerous. We may as well just react with fight or flight or freeze reaction. We want to literally scan any situation or any personal interaction with those 3 instinctive judgments. But cultural intelligence and everything where we actually want to interact on a more successful way, and that means when we work in a project, we have to think twice. We have to step back and really analyze, is this just a personal feeling which we are taking with us and just get carried away by, don't liking a person, not liking a person, or not liking their behavior or their appearance or whatever there is. And really thinking twice, is this beneficial to my relationship with this person, having to work together, having to deliver successful tasks and a successful project. This is the hard work, which actually starts within yourself, that you actually reflect, am I simply get carried away with my own stereotypical thinking, making assumptions and cultural judgments, which, this is part of your own learning in terms of building in cultural intelligence and a global mindset.
Okay, and one question to finish really, and I'm not going to open up other microphones at the moment. It's from Libby. Would you recommend having an open and direct discussion with the project team about cultural differences and how to manage them, or does the approach need to be a little bit more subtle? Again,
a fantastic question. I really like that question. And again, very typical, and you probably can refer back to the indirect and direct communication styles. I mean, there are meetings, and I witnessed them myself, and there are actually also, let's say, rhetorical techniques in order to overcome the direct communication approach. Because if you asked, let's say, a team of multicultural representatives to say, you know what, you are all invited to answer those questions openly and frankly and give me feedback, and all your ideas are valued, you can be as inviting as possible, indirect cultures wouldn't contribute. And that has many different reasons, and you can't expect, and I mentioned that earlier, an example of even getting feedback from people who see me queue jumping, they wouldn't tell me that directly. Yeah, even if you're inviting them proactively, they wouldn't necessarily come forward. And that is maybe for many reasons, whether they have their cultural restrictions in many ways. They may as well feel intimidated. They may as well feel, oh, there's maybe a superior in the room and I'm not allowed to speak before he or she speaks. There are so many different layers of how you perceive that situation that you have to, as in conclusion, allow for both indirect and direct communication styles to come forward to have that discussion about cultural differences. So there must be many ways to address both those different communication styles to be able to capture all the cultural knowledge which is already within the team and helping them to advance to build that cultural intelligence knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a few more questions here. I'm going to have to disappoint Salim in terms of any more questions. Apologies for that, but do please, continue to the discussion with Marina. I'm sure you're going to make yourself available. You've got all sorts of contact details there, so you'll be happy for people to contact you.
Oh, absolutely,
directly. Just before we finish, could you flick back to the reflective learning piece? It's always interesting, I think.
Let me just do this.
And as we do that, people can continue to send in their information. There we are. So I think in terms of feedback, it's always useful to look at this. This is in the moment feedback. Some people have been putting that in during this Q&A. So it was something that is useful to you, useful to us, and obviously a copy is going to be available to everyone. But a whole range of comments there.
Absolutely, I really enjoy reading that now because I haven't had the chance earlier.
So I won't necessarily put you on the spot to see what what your favorites are, but
no, they're all very good. I mean, for me as a cross-cultural consultant, it's always good to get an understanding how my material is also giving people who really need those skill sets a better and deeper insight and awareness. This is so important for me to also see that I have been able to give people insights and a deeper understanding there. And I hope projects will be delivered in a more enjoyable way, but also in a more successful way.
Yeah, for me personally, I was pleased when, as a result of your detailed description, I saw the older woman as opposed to the younger woman. I'd not seen her before, so that was something. I thought, oh, is there something about me here? But that was pleasing. And then I was particularly pleased with the answer right to left in terms of that comic strip. And I was one of the two that got that one right. So that was pleasing for me.
Well done. Have you been to Egypt or the Middle East?
Hey, there's no prizes today, but no, I think I've come across that one before. But there are so many insights that you've provided, which is absolutely brilliant. It's fitted very well with previous presentations from Nigel and Rochelle Nilsson last week. So that's great. And we'll use the entire recording. We'll upload that onto Vimeo later and send all the information out there. Very, very pleased that over 50 people have stayed for this extra bit. So
wow.
So that's good. And
how many did we have in the call together? Can you?
We had I think 120 tops, which isn't bad. Wow. It's a high. It's in terms of those that booked, that's a pretty good show. We're happy with that. But what we also do is we send out an email both to the attendees, and they get the PDU code, and to the absentees. So we make sure that they can catch up on that as well. So and that's something Nigel or myself will get done this afternoon and out within a few hours. Nigel, you're back. Any kind of final thoughts?
Yeah, I just found it completely an engrossing subject. I've had some experience of my own working in the Middle East, Asia, and China. And a lot of what Marina shared with us just rang true from my own personal experience, and it's great to have that sort of reinforcement, to be honest. But there's no doubt that I think cultural immersion before you start to go into these markets is absolutely vital. But the experience of it is so great as well. I remember when I was working with an Indian management team out in Dubai, I had to spend the first 20 minutes of any meeting just talking about the cricket and how good India was. And so I learned a lot about cricket, not my favourite sport, but it is a way into the conversation, it's a way into the relationship. And most definitely that I think that triangle thing that you showed, Marina, as one of your slides, is so powerful. I'm probably going to put that on my wall because I think it's you know, it can give so much learning to a lot of people, and you know, give us some great insights and awareness of how to behave you know, in working with different people from different cultures and backgrounds. So thoroughly entertaining, thoroughly enjoyed it. As you say, we've still got 53 people on the call right now, which is absolutely amazing.
Excellent. Yeah, so they're listening in. Can they still ask questions, or is that something which we have now? What's your sort of take there?
Well, when we finish, we've got a list of all the questions that we can run off as a report and share them with you, so that you can provide any.
And what I did do, but sorry,
so sorry, Marina. What we normally do is we'll provide you with a list of the questions that the guys have asked that haven't been answered. And usually when we put up on the PMI UK webinar library all the details from this webinar, there's a Q&A section which you will provide answers to, which will be just listed out on there. So maybe that can cover the ones that you haven't had the opportunity to answer.
And I mean, everybody could also connect with me via LinkedIn, and we can take the conversation further there. I may as well, you know, create a blog from those questions as well. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to keep the conversation going, and I've been really pleased and happy to support the PMI community there.
Okay, I think there's at least one master's project you can support on by the sound of it as well.
Yes.
Pretty recent, so that would be very useful.
Yeah, I was very impressed. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, we've got some great comments coming in here. I was going to just kind of share a little bit of our experience, or I don't know, in terms of a lot of work went on in technical rehearsals, particularly that Nigel and Marina did. And it probably only really came together about 3 minutes before we started. But in terms of the technology, I think it's been pretty flawless. So, you know, it was worth putting that effort in. And, you know, I know if we'd been at the level we were on Monday, it would have been thoroughly distracting for you and for our audience. So, you know, I think we really came good on that.
I must say, thank you very, very much for some top and honestly, and I just made that comment. So
sorry, is that classic picture of the serene swan going across the lake, and you're not seeing the engine room under the surface powering the legs?
Fantastic! So, I think it makes all the difference to having a fantastic and really also being able to just focus on, you know, my subject matter topic here. And being supported by a fantastic project team here.
Hey, we do our best. So with that in mind, we'll finish up the call. But again, it's been very enjoyable and very informative. So thank you for that.
Thank you very, very much. Also to everyone who participated and attended. I really was very pleased and delighted to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Marina.